Howdy YouTube, Esnix here with a video. I'm going to do an intro, a redo of an intro to the ezarcher build system that I've used for years now. I remember I did a video about 3 years ago and I got a recent comment on it suggesting an updated video. So here it is, an updated video to the ezarcher build system that I use to create my ezarcher Arch Linux based respins. Now we're looking at a VM here of ezarcher XFCE edition. This is the ISO installed from May 30th, 2024 and fully updated. And we will build the system and talk about various components of that process, the methodology, the settings files, my steps.sh script that I've scripted the build process with. So we'll get into that. Now, I will make the screen a bit bigger, full screen it at some point, and we'll probably go back and forth depending on need. So the ezarcher, let's do that right now actually. The ezarcher ISOs all contain an ezarcher folder in the home folder. In that folder are all of the documentation, the guides, the install scripts, the PkgBuild files, the reling config files, the scripts that I've created, and the templates for each of my desktops. So take a look at the templates first. We have a Cinnamon, a KDE, an LXQT, a Mate, and an XFCE template. Each one of these 7 zip files contains the full set of packages and files that I use to create each spin. What I've done in this particular VM is I've already copied out and extracted the XFCE folder, template folder, and we have all of the files that I use to insert into the build process. Now the build process starts with the basics. It starts with the USR share Arch ISO config file. Let's move this over just to make sure my camera isn't covering the screen. Now this Arch ISO folder with configs has what's called the baseline and the reling folders. The reling folder is the standard folder used, the set of files and settings used to create the official Arch ISOs that are on archlinux.org. Everything here is what Arch uses to build their official ISOs with. Now what I do is I take this folder, copy it into my build folder, and then replace the files that I wish to replace or add files I wish to add. Let's close that. Let's open up the steps.sh script here. And we will line wrap it. Now this file doesn't change that often because most of these steps are very generic. This is a simple bash script file, and it's, to me, very easy to interpret. Starts out with a few variables that I define. The username that I'm going to have on the live system, the user password that I will have on the live system, the root password on the live system, and the host name of the live system. All of these variables are used later on in the script to produce other files included into the build. You can change your username here, you can change the user password, you can change the root password and the host name, and then you don't have to worry about all of the other functions because those functions will call these variables, not the actual content of the variable. So by changing the username up here, you've changed the username throughout the build, and so on and so forth. We have some general functions here. Test for the root user. You do have to be root to run steps.sh or sudo. Display line errors if there are any. If you've made changes and you all of a sudden get an error, hopefully it'll tell you about what line that error is on. Clean up the working directories. When the script finishes, it cleans up the working directories if they're there. The requirements really just to install the program Arch ISO and the files in the package mkinit cpio Arch ISO. We then, as I said, copy the reling folder and name it EasyReling. We then remove, whoops, what did I do there? I just deleted stuff, didn't I? No, I didn't. Yes, I did. How did I do that? What did I do? Let's close this. Reopen it. Okay. I then remove a whole bunch of things from the default reling folder. The message of the day, the linux.preset file, the SSH config file, the grub, EFI boot, syslinux boot, xdg folder, and the mkinitcpio.conf.d file as well. I will replace all those with my own in here. I then copy my custom local repository into the opt folder of the running system, the host system, the build system. This will also get copied into the ISO. My custom repo includes, I think, 5 packages. The Calamares package, the PkgB package, the downgrade package, the mkinitcpio OpenSwap package, and the Trizen package. Now the Calamares, the PkgB, and the mkinitcpio packages are all Calamares related. Downgrade is a package out of the AUR. It allows you to downgrade packages. The Trizen package is an AUR helper. It's a very lightweight Perl script-based AUR helper and wrapper around Pacman. I prefer it to things like Yay or Paru, but you can certainly put those in if you want. I like having one in there just as a default, and I want a small one, doesn't have any real dependencies outside of Perl, which is a standard package included in the system anyway. Building these files is a little out of the scope of this video, Calamares especially. That deserves its own video of how to build Calamares. Suffice to say, they've already been built. I usually build the version of Calamares right before I'm running a build of an ISO, just to make sure Calamares is built against all of the current libraries. We're not going to do that today because I just want to get through the build of the ISO, and this will suffice. EFI boot, grub, and syslinux contain customizations to the boot files on the ISO. One of the changes I make is I use the Linux LTS kernel that requires that the boot files reference Linux LTS, not Linux. So if you look in EFI boot, the entries will reference VM Linux LTS, and the init RAM Linux LTS instead of the standard Linux kernels. I also set some parameters for the booting. Cowspace sets the virtual hard drive image to 4 gigabytes. Copy to RAM, no, specifies that we're not copying the content of the ISO to RAM, we're running it from the ISO. And then the Nouveau Radeon and settings and the Intel settings set the mode set setting to on with the 1. The last couple of things, the last thing loads NVMe drivers on boot. So if you're using an NVMe drive, it should work with those better. And that is that file. I also have a similar file for no mode set booting. So if you have problems with the graphic drivers with mode setting, you can try with no mode setting. And that's an option in the boot menu, the EFI boot menu of the ISO. Same thing for syslinux. This applies to booting in a legacy BIOS mode. I can set the background image and then create the menu for that booting as well. Making the same changes, specifying the LTS kernel and init RAM, specifying all of the options, the cowspace option, the copy to RAM option, the video options, and creating one with mode set setting and one without mode set setting. Let's see, also in the grub config file there, do the same thing really. The only changes I make are changing the menu entries for my own system rather than identifying as Arch, the LTS kernel and RAM, and all of the boot options, cowspace, copy to RAM, mode setting, NVMe loading. So all those changes are there in the boot files. Let's see. Okay, then we get into systemd services. I do remove quite a bit from the default reling. I remove cloud init. I remove getty tty1. I remove a number of the daemon services that help running in certain VMs. I also remove the SSHD service and remove the IWD service. I then create a whole bunch of systemd links, mostly systemd network manager, as well as havged and the display manager I set to SDDM. I also include all the cups services, so you have a full printing backend on the ISO. I then copy in a whole bunch of files from my build folder into the reling folders. The pacman.conf file, the profile.sh file, my packages file, the contents of the grub, the EFI boot, the syslinux boot, etc, opt, and usr. So all of the contents of this folder, and all of these files get copied into the build process. Now, you know what? Before we go any further, I'm actually going to start the build process. So this gets a chance to run while we're talking. So what we'll do is we'll make this a little bigger here. We'll become root. Clear the screen and run with bash steps.sh. I've done this before, so we don't have to go through the downloading of anything. We're just going right to the checking of the packages because they're all in the Pacman cache, and then it'll get on to installing. So I've cut out a little bit of time here. This will continue on in the background. And you can see a whole lot of links were created in the file system while the build is going on. Don't worry about these. These will disappear as the build finishes. Let's get into a little bit of the settings that I transfer into the ISO. In the etc folder, these are all going to get copied into the build of the ISO. Calamares settings. These control the way Calamares behaves. Now, these are things you have to decide on yourself. You can use my examples, of course. I provide everything. If you like my decisions, you can keep them and use them. If you don't, the responsibility is on you. Figure out how and what to change to get the effects you want. All the modules that I control in Calamares have a module.conf file. The bootloader, the display manager, the FS tab, the grub config, so on and so forth. Some of the big changes I make. Let's open up the bootloader here. I make sure that the LTS kernel is specified because that's what I'm using. The FS tab, that's pretty basic. I don't think I changed much here of anything. That's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted. The grub config. You'll notice the system slows down as the build process goes through its CPU usage. The grub config. Pretty sure I don't change much there. Let's see, the mount. Here's where I do most of my changes. I use the default setup for the extra mount points for the BTRFS mount point subvolumes. And the mount options is where I really put in my own twists. I make sure in a BTRFS file system that the no discard, no auto frag, and no atime are specified. In all default file systems, ext4 and XFS, I specify the no discard, no atime. And for the EFI system, I specify defaults and a UMask to protect that file system. The no discard and the lack of compression, especially in BTRFS, may be controversial to some people. This is the way I like to do it. Using my system, you either know this and accept it, or you're responsible for picking your own options. Let's see, packages I remove upon installation Arch install because I do include that in the live image. I remove Calamares and CKB comp. They're no longer needed on an installed system, of course. Shell process, move easy mk init. I make sure to clean up the mk init config files and copy in my own. Since I'm using the LTS kernel, I need one to specify the LTS kernel in the mkinit cpi.conf file. That's the reason for that. Let's see what else. In the users file, I specify all the groups that I want my user to be a member of, specify some other settings, and create the hostname file. That's about it here. You can look at Calamares' default settings to see where I've changed it. but I only include my changes. The branding I've set up to be my own branding, so Calamares looks the way I want it to look. And last but not least, the settings file.conf. I have to create 2 instances of the shell process to do my work at the end of the installation, and then use pretty much the defaults here to run the modules of Calamares in the order I wish to run them. So that's all of the Calamares settings. We also have settings for grub in default here. I set the grub distributor to my own brand, and I enable OS Prober. So upon installation, OS Prober is run to detect other operating systems. Arch's default is not to do that. Let's see, what else? Network Manager, systemd, all files that I've added because I use Network Manager instead of systemd, network D. The mkinit cpio stuff, I have my own preset file that I copy back that you saw was done by a shell process in Calamares during the installation. Let's see what else. I think I already talked about the Calamares, the repo, so that's good. And yeah, the packages file. Let's take a look at that. The packages.x8664 file. This contains a list of all packages that I include in my build. The first 130 lines or so are all default Arch ISO packages, with the exception of the kernel. I include the Linux LTS kernel instead of the Linux kernel. You're more than free to change that, make it whatever you want, whichever kernel you want. There are a lot of little changes to do if you do that, though. The system files I put in, the compression utilities I make sure are in the system, file system utilities, basically GVFS, all the multimedia packages I like to have available. Along with multimedia, I put in Pipewire. Now I put in instructions how to change over to Pulse Audio in the build if you wish to. Comment all the Pipewire, uncomment all the Pulse Audio, and you'll have Pulse Audio. Pretty simple stuff. All the Xorg packages I put in, all the networking tools I put in, fonts, printing support, the desktop XFCE, and any program specific to it that I wouldn't want in other desktop choices. Display Manager, I use SDDM exclusively, no matter what the desktop. The Calamares build and make dependencies and runtime dependencies. Calamares itself, and the 2 packages from the AUR, downgrade and Trizen. Let's take a look over at the terminal, see where we're at. We are almost done building the airroot SFS file, which is the squash FS image of the file system included on the live ISO. And you can see we're 90% already. Cool. Let's get back to the steps sh script here. Now, I set the hostname file to whatever hostname I chose in the my hostname variable above. I create a password file for root and the user. My username is from the variable above. I create a group file which assigns my user to all of the groups that I wish, and that's the group file. I create the shadow file, which is the passwords. Now I generate the user hash with OpenSSL password -6 and the password from the variable. I do the same with the root hash. I then use the hashes to create the shadow file. I then create the gshadow file with my username and all the groups that I want it included in. And finally, I run Arch ISO, setting the work directory to work, the output directory to out, and the build directory to ezarch or the profile directory. And that's the steps.sh script. You would have to do all these steps manually to recreate what this script does. And we are done. I'm not done talking, but we're done with the build. So let's take a quick peek here. We have an ezarch folder where all the working files were collected. We have the work folder where all the work was done. This folder is about 9 gigs in this particular build. And then we have an out directory with the output of the ISO. We can see the ISO right here. Happens to be 2.3 gigabytes, 2,463,000,000 blah 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 bytes. And that is the ISO file that you can put on a flash drive, or if you really want to put it on a DVD, I think you can too. Boot it, run it, install it, you're good to go. What I usually do, even though the script does this when it exited, I believe, no, it didn't. It didn't run the cleanup. It runs the cleanup on start of the script, not at the end of the script. So if you want to reclaim that used space, you can go in and remove ezarch, and you can remove work, and that will remove those two directories. You'll get back close to 10 gigs basically of space. You can also move the out folder up a directory, and that way your build directory, your template directory here, is now clean. You can use it again immediately if you wish. The output directory, I moved up a directory, so it's right here, and there is our ISO. We can clear up the package cache. So pacman scc, and reclaim all of that space as well. Run it again just to make sure. And we are back at a pretty clean system now. If you really want, you can reboot to clear out any old bind mount points, but those should be cleared by the Arch ISO program running anyway. I think that about covers it. We covered all of the build files, we covered all of the boot files, all of the settings files, the grub files, we covered the packages. Oh, we didn't cover pacman.conf or profile.sh. So let's cover the pacman.conf file that the build used. So we'll open that up. The only changes I really make to this file is I believe I set the parallel downloads to 5. I forgot what the default is. I've been using 5 so long, and that's what I think of. And the last little bit, or the last 2 bits, I enable the multilib repo, and I enable my easy repo as a file repo, you notice, in the opt directory. So all of the pacman.conf settings are in that file, not the one on my host system or the build system, but the one in the template. The profile.def.sh script here is edited only where I need to edit it. I change things like the ISO name, the label, the publisher, the application, and the version to name it and date the ISO the way I wish. I specify, let's see, the inclusion of scripts that I want in the build that are not part of the default. And those are the last, 4 or 5 lines here. My ezmaint script, my grubinstall script, my ffinstall script, and the ezarch.bios and UEFI install scripts, if you want to play with those. Now those live in, let's see, where do those live? In USR, local, bin, are all of my scripts. These are all transferred into the build. So you can run my bash-based installer for BIOS or UEFI, my ezmaint script, my Firefox install script, and my grub install script. Now the Firefox install script will grab Firefox directly from Mozilla, install it into your user's home folder as a program. And that way, whenever you run Firefox, all of the program files are in your user home folder. They're not in the system folders, which means that when you run an update to Firefox, you're updating it right within Firefox. You're not updating it with Pacman. Some people might like that. Some people might not like that. It's not a default. It's just there as an option. My ezmaint script, however, is something that you can run. Let's run that. Give you a quick view of that. Sudo ezmaint password. And this is a little script I've created to run several functions. You can update the whole system. You can reset all Pacman keys if that becomes a problem. You can regenerate the mirror list with Reflector. Now my settings are US mirrors, HTTPS mirrors protocol, max rating the top 10 mirrors. So if you don't like those settings, you can choose your own. Cleaning the package cache, cleaning up journal space, cleaning user cache on next boot. What that does is it creates a temporary systemd unit that flushes the .cache folder of your user's home folder. Everything in there is recreated as needed anyway. Pretty safe to just dump it all, if you wish. You can also enable Bluetooth services. Bluetooth is installed, it's not enabled by default. And then exit. You know what? I'll show you the install scripts too. If you run sudo ezarch.uefi, my ezarch installer script, menu-based installation script for Arch. You can run through the menus, creating username, password, hostname, choosing the partition, the drive and partition it, install a base system, configure the base system, install broad categories of software like networking and printing and things like that. Choose a desktop, install grub, and exit, and reboot, and you have an installed Arch system. The desktops mirror the same, I think, 5 desktops that I provide templates for. So Cinnamon, XFC, Mate, Plasma, Cinnamon, XFC, Mate, LXQT. So all of these scripts are included. The grub install script is interesting for me. Let's open that up. What this does is it tests the device, the mount point that you have grub installed on, comes up with a variable, whether it's on an NVMe or more standard SDA or type disk, and then runs the appropriate grub install command if you're on the FI system or if you're on a legacy BIOS system. So whenever grub is updated, this will reinstall grub onto the hard drive from the package. Now, the reason I include this is not just to use as a script you can call whenever you want after you run an update. You can use it that way. However, in my documentation, I do describe how to set up a Pacman hook that triggers this to run whenever the grub package is updated. This is something else you can do. So I'll give you a number of options here. Everything's described either in my how-to files or just by looking through the scripts themselves. Anything else to talk about? I think we've covered everything, amazingly so. Hopefully, I've done it in such a way that if you need to rewatch parts of this to more fully grasp what I'm doing, go right ahead. Download the packages. They're all available on SourceForge under the Ezarcher title page. And yeah, have fun with it. If you have any questions, ask in the video, and I'll try my best to answer. You can also ask on the discussion section of my SourceForge project. As always, stay safe, have fun, take care, and stay safe. You'll see me all in another video, folks. Bye-bye.